I said, if we all agree to second, we're there for one another. That's enough. I'm glad that we have this kind of interaction. Thank you, William. Kyra, can you tell us what you're working on? You've got a cool project related to
Hi, my name is Kyra, and I never thought that I could learn to draw or paint because I was never talented. And then I met Anna about 1 or 2 years ago in our group. And when I bought one of her paintings, I asked her, had she been painting all her life? And she said, no, I only started learning 5 years ago. So then I knew there might be hope for me. And I was looking at my neighborhood's Facebook page, and there was somebody giving art lessons who lives on my street 2 houses down. And so I'm slowly making progress and feeling hopeful that I can earn some extra money as an artist. And right now I'm using acrylics on cotton canvases, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Bueno, no sé.
that's really exciting. Get inspiration from within our group and having it be something that helps you, Kyra. All right, so thank you all for coming today, and I'd like to try and give a little intro to Sarah Stuckey. She is someone that my husband and I met a couple years ago, and she's done educational talks for different groups, student groups and our electric vehicle group. And so we thought she would be a fantastic addition to the Professional Women's Network of Costa Rica, as well as a topic, climate change, and her community involvement in Monteverde would be really interesting for our group. So I'll try and give a little rundown of what her bio is. She's been active in the local community development for more than 20 years as a Monteverde Quaker, with the belief that conservation is only possible if sustainable development is achieved. She's a pioneer developing sustainable tourism projects to promote local products and support the local community. Working with small, fair trade, organic, sustainable coffee farmers, she developed the Monteverde Coffee Tour. She also founded and operated the Monteverde Cheese Factory Tour for more than 14 years. She's been active in the community, volunteering at the community library, working with the Monteverde Friends School. She has participated in sustainable community development initiatives such as Finca La Bella, a land tenure program in the San Luis Valley, and supported local public schools through the development of sister schools programs. So for more than 14 years as a member of the board of directors of the Monteverde Cheese Factory, she worked to support and develop the local dairy industry and implementation of sustainable agricultural programs and environmental programs, such as the reduction of gas emissions on dairy farms and uses of biodegradable packaging. A lot. Sarah's current projects include managing the family dairy farm, actively working towards making it carbon neutral, a project that includes reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, solar energy production, as well as sustainable food production. She's an avid climate change activist and works in education and raising awareness on climate change. Welcome, Sarah. We're so glad you're here. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. So yes, today I am going to be talking about many of those things that Sarah mentioned, talking about a little bit about the community, but mostly about climate change and how climate change is affecting not only Monteverde, but also all of Costa Rica. This is a subject that is very dear to me. I have seen many effects of climate change in my community in my relatively short life, and it's a subject that we need to be aware of. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. The community of Monteverde how many of you guys have been there? Oh, everyone. Okay, so you all have been to Monteverde just to get a sense of where it is. Well, almost everybody. Of where it is. Monteverde is a very small community up in the Tina mountain range, world famous for having been founded by the Quakers. Actually, the Quakers were not the first people to arrive. The first people to arrive there were Costa Ricans. Ramon Leitón and Florencia Mendez arrived in the community of San Luis, just beneath Monteverde, in November 1914. So the Quakers didn't arrive until 1951, many years later, but they get all the fame for founding the community because they give it its name. And before the Quakers came, the community used to be named Cerro Plano, nothing to do with Monteverde. And the Quakers ended up in the mountains of Iran by pure chance. The group of Quakers that came to Costa Rica in 1951 were coming because of the Universal Military Training Act. That is the law that requires all the young folks to register for the Army on their 18th birthday. That law was passed in the United States in 1948. Quakers, being pacifists, didn't really agree with being forced to register for the Army. So many of the young men that you see pictured here in this picture ended up refusing to register for that draft. And because of this, they ended up being judged and tried and sentenced to spending a year and a day in prison. So that meant that this family, all these families we saw, ended up deciding to leave the United States and eventually choosing Costa Rica, mostly because, as you know, that the Figueres abolished the Army also in 1948. And they said, okay, this is a country that shares some of our values. And they ended up coming to Monteverde, or what they ended up naming Monteverde, just by pure chance. That was the land that was affordable to them. I'm not going to say much more about the history of the community. I'm happy to answer questions later. I will mention that when they came, they established a cheese factory. That was very important because the cheese factory really created a very important socioeconomic change. Up until the time the Quakers arrived, the area was incredibly remote, all subsistence living. People just had a couple of cows, a couple of pigs, a couple of chickens. The cheese factory really ended up promoting a very important socioeconomic change, creating the very first cash economy, and that started spurring much of the socioeconomic development in the community. People started harvesting the ecological subsidy of the land, cutting down the cloud forest, transforming that into hard cash by the way of cheese, and that spurred the growth and development of the whole community, not only Quakers, but also Costa Ricans that also lived in that area as well. The area started to grow, but all of that growth was centered all around dairy farming. For those of you that have been to Monteverde, this picture looks nothing probably like what you saw. Believe it or not, this picture was taken in the early 1980s. The little town of Santa Elena, right outside Monteverde, everything that you see there is pasture. And that is because up through the mid-1980s, you could basically do two types of jobs in Monteverde. You could milk cows, or you could milk cows. And that was about it. There wasn't really much other socioeconomic opportunity. Today, the situation is different, but the cheese factory still exists. It is no longer locally owned. It was sold about 11 years ago, but the cheese factory still receives milk from 125 local families. My family is one, and sells about $20 million a year worth of cheese. So it is a very important socioeconomic base for the local community. Parallel to dairy farming, Monteverde also has a coffee economy. Coffee was first introduced into Monteverde by Monteverde's first permanent resident, Jose Mendez, back in 1920. But the amounts produced were relatively small. And even though there was a processing mill that was built in the 1950s, coffee, contrary to cheese, has a low value to weight ratio. So in order to make a lot of money, you need to sell a whole bunch of it. seeing as how a two-wheel drive vehicle did not make it up to Monteverde until 1967. You can imagine the challenges of transporting big truckloads of coffee up the mountain. So coffee starts to become important in the 1980s as the local economy starts to diversify and people start to sell products with added value, for example, organic, certified, fair trade, and whatnot. Now, back when the community got started, the Quakers set aside a piece of land for the Monteverde Friends Community Church, the Friends Meeting House we call it, also for the cheese factory, and on the 1,400 hectares they built, there was also the headwaters of the Guasimo River. So they set aside that piece of land to be protected. But protection for the Quakers in 1951 meant something perhaps a little bit different than it would to you and I today. They saw it as protecting a resource. They were protecting the watershed and protecting the trees. Okay? In fact, my great uncle Lawrence used to go up hunting in what he used to call the jungle on the weekends in that protected area, bring home wildlife to put in the soup pot. Okay, so it was a different ethos, a different philosophy. By the 1970s, biologists started to come to Monteverde, in part attracted to the English-speaking community doing research. Two of those biologists, George Powell and his wife Harriet, started viewing that protected area a little bit different, perhaps more like you and I might visualize it today. They saw it as protecting the ecosystem. And they set about to work with the Quaker community, especially with Wilfred Wyndham. That was very important because Wilfred had actually been Costa Rica's very first chainsaw importer and managed to convince him to legally protect this piece of land. Today, we know that as one of the first private reserves in Costa Rica, the Monteverde Biological Reserve or the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. Today, world famous for protecting species like the resplendent quetzal. But actually, when the reserve was founded, the keystone species people were wanting to protect was the golden toad. Some of you have probably heard of that before. Others of you may not have. The golden toad was discovered in 1967 on a corner of what was to become the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. And when they discovered it, people became very excited because it turns out it was a brand new species. This was the only place in the world this little toad existed on 3 kilometer square section of the Brillante section of what would become the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. So protecting this habitat was crucial to protecting the species. Unfortunately, protecting the Monteverde Cloud Forest was not enough. The golden toad ends up going extinct in the late 1980s, not due to deforestation. They were very successful in protecting the forest, but actually due to a small rise in global average temperatures. Back in the 1980s, we used to call that global warming. Today, we call that climate change. But that shift in global temperature was enough to propagate a fungus. And the fungus completely annihilated the golden toad population. Today, it is believed to be extinct. And in scientific circles, some people consider the golden toad to be one of the world's first victims of climate change. It wasn't perhaps the first species to go extinct. The difference was it was world famous when it went extinct. And so people noticed, it raised a big red flag, they researched, and they eventually linked its disappearance with climate change. So today, we're better known for the resplendent quetzal, and unfortunately, not everyone remembers our golden toad. But what the discovery of the golden toad did was create a catalyst for tourism. People wanted to come see the golden toad. It was written up in scientific journals and in National Geographic, and all of a sudden, everyone wanted to come to Monteverde. And that sparked an important socio-economic change. Today, about 400,000 people a year come to Monteverde. So Monteverde has changed quite a bit. If we look at the population, and let's start
Here at the bottom, you can see back in 1973, we're a very small community of about 1,300 people. So think very rural, very isolated dairy farming community in the middle of nowhere, okay? Our population growth was very small. As you can see, less than 100 people per decade. But as tourism starts to become part of the economy, we start growing, and according to the last census, we have about 5,300 people that live in Monteverde year-round. So in my lifetime, Monteverde has gone from having hillsides that look like this to ones that look like this, a little bit of a change, and the center of town that used to look like this to one perhaps a little bit more like you would see it if you visited today. And you start to see urban growth encroaching not only in the more protected areas you see on the top, but also some of the farming areas around the community center as well. So all of this growth really started concerning people. Way back in 1986, as tourism was just taking off, members of the local community started saying, well, we protected the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve, but if we don't do something and protect a little bit more land, pretty soon it's just going to be an island conservation amidst a sea of urbanization. And they set about with the vague idea of protecting a little bit more land. And they created an organization they called the Monteverde Conservation League, with the vague idea of maybe protecting some land on the Pacific slope. One of the biologists that was involved in this protection effort, Sharon Kinsman, went to visit some friends of hers in Sweden at the time. They happened to be school children, and they asked Sharon if she would give a little talk, just like I am today, about the cloud forest and the golden toad that hadn't gone extinct then. And Sharon did, and the small little one-room schoolhouse, the kids said, we want to help protect this cloud forest. And Sharon said, well, we're trying to buy up a little bit of land. So those kids, they went out and organized a bake sale. And they started raising money. And then the newspaper wrote up something about it. That got them very excited. So then they went out and organized a car wash. And then the newspaper in the next town wrote up something about it. And that got them even more excited. And eventually the movement went viral. And after a while, the Swedish government heard about it. And they said, well, I guess we could match whatever money those nice little school children raised. Well, those nice little school children ended up raising more than $1 million. All this money, it's very hard to see because of the poor light, but all this money comes to Monteverde over several years. And they're able to buy up everything you see here in dark green. And I apologize, it's a little bit light. Almost completely surrounding the original Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve in pink, joining it with the R&L National Park in yellow, and the University of Costa Rica Reserve at the bottom, making it the largest private reserve in all of Costa Rica, possibly even all of Central America. And they very aptly named it the Children's Eternal Rainforest, because those kids wanted to protect it forever. I want to tell you something about myself. I have a daughter. Her name is Claudia. She's off at the National Museum right now with my husband. Because she said, Mom, I've seen your talk. I don't want to come and listen to it all over again. So anyway, I sent her off to the museum this morning. She's 11, almost 12. She came home from school a year ago, just when she was in the middle of 4th grade, almost a year and a half. It's in November. Very excited one day. She said, Mom, guess what? We had a visitor today in school. I said, really? Who was it? She said, well, he was kind of an old guy, a little bit like you. I said, thank you so much. And she said, he told me that when he was just my age, somebody from Monteverde came to his school. And that he and his friends started the Children's Eternal Rainforest. Is that true, Mom? And I feel terrible because I felt I haven't done a good job of teaching our local history like we should have. You know how it is. We could do a little bit better. So I explained that yes, that was true. And then actually, I had been pen pals with these kids when I was in high school. And then she wants to know what a pen pal was. So we spent a little bit of time discussing that, and I was informed that no one would ever want to be a pen pal today. That's too slow. So anyway, we discussed that, and after a while, she got a very serious look on her face. Said, "Mom, I didn't know kids could do that." And I thought, you know, this is a really important message that I need to start sharing, because kids literally have the power to change the world. And we have the perfect example literally right in our backyard in Monteverde. And this conservation effort has been very successful. And one of the reasons it's been so successful is that starting on day one, being founded by children, they started investing in environmental education. And the message for conservation is so much more important when it's your kids that are coming home and saying, you're not supposed to cut down the trees, and you're supposed to plant more trees, and you're supposed to protect forests instead of go hunting. And all these messages are so much more important. And it's been so effective that they have not only protected the absolute protection area, but they have also protected many of the farms around the outskirts of the park. Now, this area that you see here, this is a satellite picture just out of Monteverde, and you can see all these lines. These are all farms, and all those lines throughout them, these are all windbreaks, native tree species voluntarily planted by the farmers that end up connecting forest fragments that were never cut for one reason or another. And that ends up creating biological corridors. And that is very important, because the birds and the animals, they don't know where the park starts or where it stops. All they want is a healthy ecosystem. They just want a healthy habitat. So these protective mechanisms have gone way beyond just protecting the forest. Unfortunately, all of this conservation I'm talking about is being threatened. And it's being threatened by global changes in climate, weather patterns. The disappearance of the golden toad was really only the canary in the coal mine. It was nature telling us something is happening. Back in 1989, I think we had no idea things would get as bad as it's starting to be now. But it was just the beginning. There's a whole lot of other effects of climate change that I want to tell you about that we've been seeing in Monteverde. But before I do, I want to take a step back and go over some of the science of climate change. And this is really important because we've probably all heard little bits and pieces about it. So if you have, bear with me, because it is important that we all start from a clean slate, from the same page. So climate change is caused by the emission of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide gets the worst reputation, not because it's the worst gas. There are many others much worse, but because we have emitted the most of it. It's nothing new in our atmosphere. It's been present for millions of years. The amounts vary depending upon an ice age cycle. It's trapped in the ice, or if the ice melts and it gets released out into the atmosphere. Notice this great big jump that you guys see there at the end. This jump can perhaps better be seen up with the red line. You see up here on the top, that reflects this big jump here. And you can see for at least the previous 800 years, we had a fairly stable amount of CO2 in our atmosphere of about 280 parts per million. And then about 200 years ago, we invented the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine. Now, I don't know how many of you can think back to middle school, back when I first learned about the Industrial Revolution. And when I did, my middle school teacher told me it was absolutely the best thing that had ever happened to us. Because that steam engine made our life easier. It started increasing our life expectancy, less manual labor, we were able to travel further. And what she told me is it was all because we burned a little bit of coal. What she didn't tell me was that burning that little bit of coal started spewing carbon dioxide out into the atmosphere And it took it from a fairly stable 280 parts per million to 427.1, where we're at today. So literally almost off the top of that screen. And it is continuing to rise. I just added this little screenshot about a year ago because I got very frustrated when people started saying, well, we don't have to worry about climate change so much now because our emissions went down in the pandemic. And so I researched it, and it turns out they did go down that much. And now we are right on track, burning fossil fuels like they're going out of style again, back on the same exact trajectory we were on before. And the emissions are continuing to rise. If you're curious where these emissions are coming from, it turns out my middle school teacher was right. Back when we started, it was all burning coal. But look at the amount back here at the beginning. Very, very minimal amounts. Even when we get to the turn of the century, we start adding a little tiny bit of oil, which is in green. It's still a fairly minimal amount. But look what happens once we get to the 1950s. Right after World War II, we started having global changes in economics. We started having global population booms. Several things happened, and all of a sudden, we go from burning just a little bit of coal to quite a bit of coal and a lot of oil. And now natural gas and cement are also very important parts of those carbons. Yes. Cement. Yes, cement is very intensive in greenhouse gas emissions because during the fabrication, there is a lot of heating up and burning of limestone. So it's very energy intensive. And so it produces a lot of emissions. And there's other effects of cement. When you build it, there's heating that goes back when you and so forth. But the most of these emissions quantified here are from the processing and making the cement, the burning of the limestone. Now, all of this burning of greenhouse gases starts to create global rises in temperatures. If we compare our temperatures to the previous century, you see for many years, we had below average global temperatures. It isn't until the 1940s we have our very first above average global temperatures. But the big jump comes, ironically, just when the golden toad disappeared in the 1980s. That is the last time this planet ever saw below average global temperatures. And from there on out, the temperatures have continued to rise. Now, when you look at this graph, the curve on this seems pretty similar to the previous one we just saw, right? There was a little curve. You notice it's the same type of a curve, but you notice this one really starts in the 1950s. And this one really starts, hard to see here because of the screen, but this starts in the 1980s. But the actual curve is very similar. And that's important to understand because it turns out there is a lag time from the moment you and I jump in our cars or our airplanes or flip the light switch or do anything that uses fossil fuels. Those fossil fuels have to make their way through the environment. And it takes about 40 years between the time we burn those fossil fuels and those fossil fuels start to have an effect on our global temperature. Once you understand that, you say, oh my goodness, these temperatures that we're seeing today are reflecting greenhouse gases that we burned back in the mid-1980s. Pretty scary. And the global temperatures are continuing to rise. I changed the format on this because oftentimes I've heard people say things like, well, last winter was very mild, but don't worry, next year everything will get back to normal. And then next year is very cold, and these people say, see, I told you, climate change doesn't exist. Some of you are smiling. You've probably heard people say things like that, right? Or they say, last summer was very hot, but don't worry, next year everything will get back to normal. And then next year it's cooler, and they say, see, I told you. The thing is, many people do not understand the difference between climate and weather. Weather happens today. It's probably going to rain today. But climate is the long-term trend. And when you look at climate change, you really have to look at and understand the long-term trends. And it isn't until you do that that you start to see there is a sustained rise in global temperature. Decade upon decade, it's continually getting hotter. I especially want you to draw your attention to this line that starts to jump way off of the chart. That was last June. Ever since last June, every single month, we have now been going 11 months continuously with record global temperatures. April closed out, breaking all the records. So unfortunately, we have jumped kind of to the next level. Scientists are still scrambling to figure out why. Some of them attribute it to the El Nino effect. Many are saying, no, this much of a global jump in temperature goes way beyond El Nino. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for the conclusive results on that to come out. But regardless of what the science is working on determining, this big of a jump is very concerning. 2023 was the hottest year we have ever had in modern history. We closed the year at 1.48 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. That is practically, I don't want to say at the 1.5 the Paris Agreement says we're not supposed to go beyond, but it is very close. But again, like I said before, you can't take the average from just 1 year. So the global average rise in temperature, people say, is 1.2 degrees Celsius. Every single day last year was at least 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. And if you're curious about what some of the effects are, here's a whole bunch of them. So like I said, the average official global rise in temperature right now is 1.2 degrees Celsius. That kind of puts us right here. Notice the first thing on the list. Increased extinction of mountain amphibians. Let's give that a big red check mark. In Monteverde, we have lost the golden toad. Probably never coming back. All of these other things on this list are lovely things that we have to look forward to. I'm not going to read through the whole list. You've heard about these things. The media talks about coral bleaching, loss of South American fauna, risk of extinction of the polar bear, coral extinction, and so forth and so on. Thankfully, here in Costa Rica, some of the media is a little bit more open about some of these things, so perhaps we'll hear about it a little bit more. But regardless, the media still doesn't talk about the last thing on the list, and I'll read it because the focus is very poor, but when we get to an average global rise of temperature of about 4 degrees Celsius, we have massive species extinction in the whole world. The media doesn't like to talk about that. We don't hear about that very much. Why do you guys think that is?
Politics.
Politics. That's a very good reason why the media doesn't talk about it. Why else?
Economics.
Economics. Nobody wants their economics threatened. Any other reasons the media might not want to talk about that?
Ignorance.
Ignorance. Yeah, this is a very complex subject. Here. It includes us. Julio is right. It includes us. We are one of the species that is slotted to go extinct when we have a global rise of temperature of 4 degrees Celsius or higher. That's pretty scary. Media definitely doesn't want to talk about that. It's much easier to say, oh, stay with the little polar bears that are going to have problems. Nobody wants to say, hey, wake up. And like you said, there's economics behind it, there's politics, there's a whole bunch of reasons. But fundamentally, this is perhaps one of the most important things we need to be aware of. Climate change is the biggest threat any of us are ever going to face in our lifetime. And if that's not enough to scare you, I'm just going to add the global rise in the oceans. Since the previous century, they've risen about 23 centimeters. That much. Doesn't seem like very much, but for every centimeter the ocean rises, you end up losing 100 meters worth of beach. And if you don't believe that's true, all you have to do is drive by Caldera in the high tide and watch the road slowly being washed away. And you say, well, the ocean hasn't risen that much, but there's a tide effect and a storm effect. And all of a sudden, boom, you lose a whole section of coastline. So here in Punta, you guys are probably all aware of what's happening. You start to see things like this. They show up on the move, on the news sometimes. And globally, the IPCC has projected that this is going to possibly be the global rise in the ocean. This graph goes to the year 2300. Now, the IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That is the UN-based organization that is responsible for getting all of the climate scientists to agree on what's going to happen. That process takes a little while. But once they do, they publish a report and they say, okay, folks, this is what's going to happen. The thing is, what happens tomorrow depends on what you and I and everyone here does today. So the way they publish this report are different scenarios. Basically here we have a low greenhouse gas emission scenario in light teal and a high greenhouse gas scenario in pink. And there's a really big difference between them. I want you to notice where we are. We are at a key moment when we can still make decisions that are going to have a drastic difference in the outcome of what happens in the future. But we don't have to wait here in Costa Rica until 2300. I talked about Caldera, but if any of you go to the Caribbean, I took this picture in Cahuita. Some of you may have been to Cahuita over the years, and remember when that park ranger station was built? It was built about 20, 25 years ago. When it was built, it was about 100 meters from high tide. You guys probably remember that. If you go today, this is the scenario you're going to see. You're going to see a very vain attempt with those sandbags trying to protect that building from washing away. Anywhere you go, but especially on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, if you start paying attention, this is going to be what you notice. It's that drastic if you start to pay attention. Regionally, these are the IPCC's projections for Central America for the year 2050. Everything in yellow will be critically affected. Now, this is richness of species and severity of the impact of climate change. Notice the yellow is the whole country of El Salvador. If we add the red, it's very critically affected. Let's just add the whole country of Belize, half of Nicaragua. And if we add the purple, extremely critically affected, let's just go on and add half of Costa Rica as well. We're facing very dire predictions. This prediction is only 25 years away. So it's relatively in the near future. But I want to ask you guys, what are the words critically affected or even severely affected bring to mind when we talk of climate change? Can you visualize anything when you say, oh, I'm going to be severely affected by climate change?
I don't want to make a big issue about it, but I lived most of my 20-something years in the States in the audience. And I have seen it firsthand, the climate change and all the problems that it caused. And last summer, they even had a bigger problem, which was that because of the drought, the high levels of the heat, the seawater actually went into the river, into the lake, and into all the water reserves. So they had to literally bring water from from Missouri all the way to the central coast, all the way to the audience, because the audience was entirely of fresh water. That was predicted when I was a student, maybe 20 years ago at the UCR. I don't believe that's, but that's exactly what's going on.
And you don't see it unless you're in New Orleans. Like, we probably, none of us, I didn't hear about that on the news. It doesn't surprise me but none of the news channels here talk about it. None of the international channels talk about it either. So when you say severely affected, it's kind of vague. Like, well, yeah, severely affected, but unless you're in New Orleans, or unless you're in Cahuita, or Manzanillo, or Caldera, you don't really see those effects. I want to give you an impression of what some of the actual effects of climate change in Costa Rica are. This is, again, IPCC data. We have 3 possible greenhouse gas scenarios here. On the top, low greenhouse gas emission. The middle, moderate greenhouse gas emission. And the bottom, high emission. On the left side, we have temperature projections. On the right, precipitation. It's hard to see, but the low emission goes anywhere from about 1.4 to 2.4 degrees Celsius. The moderate from 2.2 to 3.5, and the bottom one from 2.4 to 4.4 degrees Celsius. On the precipitation, this one goes down as much as 150 millimeters of rain. This one, 227 millimeters is the max. This one, 205, but much more widespread. Okay, that's kind of the IPCC projection for Central America. Any one of these scenarios is going to turn important areas here into a desert. That is what we're looking at in the short-term future. Now, according to the IPCC, low greenhouse gas emissions technically means an 80% reduction of emissions based on the year 2000 constant. In other words, at this moment, reaching the absolute lowest emissions projected is practically impossible unless we go into some sort of lockdown, COVID type thing, which we all can probably guess that that's probably not going to happen in the really short term. So the best outcome at this point is a moderate greenhouse gas emissions. That is what the Paris Agreement is striving to achieve. They do not want the global average temperature ideally go above 1.5, never above 2, but that means in Central America, we're looking at anywhere from 2.2 to 3.5 degrees Celsius. Yes?
So,
we're at least 20 years late. Interestingly enough, the fossil fuel companies did research on this, and they confirmed this was a problem back in 1957. And then, with that information, instead of saying, oh, we need to do something about it, they actively started leading a disinformation campaign based on the disinformation campaign the cigarette companies used as well. So yeah, we should have done something 40 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 60 years ago. The sooner we should have started on this, the better. Today, the scientists say we still have a possibility of meeting the Paris Agreement. Barely. But I want to show you what meeting the Paris Agreement is going to involve, because we all have this vague idea that, well, we need to do something. But it's kind of hard between that and saying, well, what do I actually have to do? So I want to give you a sense. Let's imagine that all of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are put together on this little piece of paper, all nice and neat. In order to meet the Paris Agreement, we have to take and cut these greenhouse gas emissions in half by the year 2030. That's 5.5 years. Then we have to take and cut them in half again by the year 2040. And then we have to take and cut them in half again by the year 2050. This will take us to what scientists are calling net zero, and this will give us a 67% chance of achieving the Paris Agreement. Not even 100, 67. They say we have the technology. The big question is, do we have the will? Do we want to? Because this is of a change. I'm talking 25 years. is going to take each and every one of us. It is going to take lifestyle changes on my behalf, on your behalf, and on your husband's behalf, on everyone we know is going to have to start to take action in order to achieve this. Yes. Please.
So let's say we have the little bill.
Yes.
The big initiative, the big, like the United States, what are China? So they say we haven't stopped our development. But that, how do we convince, how we can convince?
Well, at the end,
you have to stop that
yeah.
and continue to work.
It's not necessarily stopping development. It means we have to help people develop differently. We have to change. They say we have the technology, but your question is how do we tell India they can't develop it? No, how do we help India develop differently with different technology that has no emissions? And regarding to that, at the end, I want to show you a slide that I don't normally show, but it's very relevant to your question. So keep your question up there and think about what we have to do and who's doing the emitting, because that's important to understand as well. Visually, I want to show you, again, this is IPCC data. This is our current trajectory of emissions here in black. In order to reach the Paris Agreement, the amount of emissions that need to decrease, this is 2050 right here. This is blue line. The green line is what we need to do if we're going to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius. So 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius. The pink line at the top, that is our current trajectory of emissions, which brings us today in at about 3.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. I don't know about you, but to me, that's mighty close to the 4 degrees Celsius that we probably shouldn't go over. So that's important to bear in mind what has to happen and where we have to go. Visually, the world of lower emissions or higher emissions is very different. On this left side, we have low gas emissions. This is high gas emissions. This is IPCC data for the year 2100. The top is change in average surface temperature, change in average precipitation, and change in average sea level. There is a very big difference between taking action and not taking action. It leads us to a very different outcome. It's also very important to realize that this is something that is already happening. I've often heard people say, well, this is terrible. My grandkids are going to have to deal with it. No, we are living with it today. And thankfully in Costa Rica, we talk about it quite a bit, but every single day, we are already starting to feel these effects. It's going to get worse for our kids and our grandkids. But today, we are already starting to feel these effects. And these effects are being made better or worse by normal, natural climate phenomena. The ones that get talked about the most are El Niño and La Niña. And I'm sure you've heard about them because we talk about them all the time here in Costa Rica. El Niño happens when the Pacific waters around the equator heat up. When that happens, the global temperatures tend to rise. And here in Costa Rica, as you know, it's drier. We've just come out of a very intense El Niño cycle. La Niña is the flip side. Pacific waters around the equator cool down. Globally, temperatures tend to decrease. And here in Costa Rica, it rains a lot more. We're just starting a very intense La Niña cycle. They say this transition is going to be extremely difficult here this year because generally it tends to rain more in La Niña cycles. The problem is not that these occur. These are natural phenomena. The problem is they're getting out of balance. The last La Niña cycle we went out of was a 3-year La Niña cycle. That was practically unheard of until now. If we look at the severity, it starts back in the 1950s. These are El Niño cycles. Look at the severity of the impact of those El Niño cycles as we get along. A lot of the problems with climate change have to do with the unbalance, with the severity of the impact of these phenomena. Here in Costa Rica, another impact of climate change has been a very important decrease in cold fronts. Now, you guys have all heard about them. We talk about them on the news all the time when the moisture comes in from the Caribbean. Here in Monteverde, or at least up in Monteverde, this is critical for us because less moisture coming in means less cloud cover. And less cloud cover means that the cloud forest in Monteverde is slowly transitioning to a rainforest. It is still raining, but less, and the rain patterns are starting to change. And if you look at the monthly patterns of rainfall, you would never guess. You would say, oh my goodness, it's raining almost the same. The problem is the actual daily patterns of rain have changed. Between 1960 and 1970, in Monteverde, we had an average of 25 dry days per year. During the last 20 years, the average is 110 dry days per year. But it is raining more. So what's happening? And we've seen this a little bit in San Jose, and so forth. It's beautiful weather, day after day after day after day, and then boom, one day a month, you get the whole month's rain, and then we get these terrible floods, and we get all these, it's awful, right? And so the average rainfall count is up, but the rain distribution is starting to change. And that starts to wreak havoc, and you guys all know, we all watch the news, on infrastructure, on roads, and these extreme events are getting worse. In Monteverde, we had a very bad one for us, which was Tropical Storm Nate in 2017. Monteverde got 3 feet of rain in 2 days. And this is what happens to the top of the mountains when you get that much rain in such a short amount of time. We're all holding our breath because they said this year the transition to El Nino was going to be just as bad as 2017. And I'm going, I hope not, because it's really terrible. There are all sorts of damages to infrastructure, to roads. And when these things happen, that's what people focus on. But we have to remember there is also impact to the ecosystem. And it's severely affected. I've already talked about the disappearance of the golden toad. And people's reaction generally is, oh, I'm so sorry you lost your poor little frog. It looks like it was really cute. I have yet to have anyone say, oh, gee, gosh, I wonder what happened to the poor little snake that was going to eat the poor little frog for breakfast. The thing is, in an ecosystem, everything is connected. You affect one species, and you're going to get a domino effect to everything else. Another impact of climate change in Monteverde that has been widely documented, a decrease in the amount of hummingbirds. And you could say, why? Well, there's hummingbirds everywhere, right? Well, remember that huge increase in dry days I talked about? What happens to your garden if it doesn't rain? Do your plants flower? No, they don't, right? So just that little change in the distribution of water pattern starts to affect the flowering plants, and in turn, it starts to affect your pollinators. Again, everything is connected. Another impact of climate change in Monteverde, also widely documented, altitudinal migration of species. As it's getting hotter, the animals are moving up the mountain. The birds, the monkeys on our farm last year, we found 3 fertilants in Terciopelo. We live at 1,400 meters above sea level. The Terciopelo in the Pacific, the Terciopelo had never ever been documented there before. Last year on our farm we found 3. As it's heating up, the animals are trying to stay cool and they're moving up the mountain. And if you're a bird or a snake, you can do that. What about if you're a plant? You can't pick up your roots and go. You can change. The problem's not change. The planet's been changing for millions of years. The problem here is change takes time. And all of these changes that I've described all happen in my life. That is not enough time for a species to change. So that leads us to the very, very uncomfortable subject of extinction. This data came out in 2022. I've been monitoring it for the last 10 years. At that time, 10 years ago, it said, World Wildlife came out and said 40% of the wildlife population on this has decreased. The last data said 69% of the wildlife species is decreased. In tropical areas like Costa Rica, it's as high as 94%. This is a global average. This is very concerning. And one of the most concerning things about this is shifting baselines. We all have an image when we were kids how things were. But the image my daughter has is very different. I remember when I was a little girl going to visit friends of mine that were biologists in Monteverde, and they had the big black light out on the white sheet. You guys have probably seen it, right? And all the insects. I remember when I was a little girl going, and you couldn't even see the white sheet. About a year ago, I went to some friends who were biologists. And they had one of those white sheets out with the black light. I counted 15 insects on that sheet. That's a shifting baseline. That's the baseline my daughter's going to remember. She's going to say, this is normal for the amount of insects. And I'm having an image of totally covered with insects. You almost couldn't see the white on the black sheet. So when you have this significant of change, you have to remember there's also a shifting baseline that it's very easy for people to forget how it used to be. Another impact of climate change on Monteverde is with our food. You guys probably all recognize this as coffee. As it's getting warmer, farmers are starting to struggle with more things like leaf rust, roya. As the temperature rises, so does the fungus population. And as you know, fungus loves nice warm weather, doesn't it? And we're struggling. On our farm, last year, we lost 50% of our coffee crop to fungus. I was devastated. This year, I really wish it was last year because we lost 90% of our coffee. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought it was bad last year. We're struggling. We're trying to find new species. We're working with technicians. We produce organic. And so that's double hard because I can't just go out and spray with chemicals, right? So I have to find organic weeds that work. And we're struggling to try to save our coffee crop. In Nicaragua, 2010, this is the area after coffee production. According to the IPCC, by 2050, 25 years from now, this is the area that is after coffee production, going to be after coffee production. We all deal with migrants coming into Costa Rica. We all deal with migrants that are moving north. And some of those reasons are political, but if you dig deep enough, oftentimes, some of these reasons are also linked to climate change. Every one of the pixels on the screen that goes from yellow to blue, that translates into lost livelihoods. That translates into somebody who's going to go to the city, or someone who's going to come to Costa Rica, or someone who's going to go north, because you still need to feed your family, all right? These types of global migrations are going to be affecting us a lot in this century. So, the big question is, what do we do? The good news is, we know exactly what we have to do. We have been told time and time again, we have to reduce and cut our greenhouse gas emissions. The bad news is, we've got 5 years to cut those emissions in half, and 25 years to go down half and half again after that. In Monteverde, 9 years ago, we said that we wanted to become the first carbon neutral, not even neutral, but negative community in Costa Rica. And we formed an organization we call Clima, Comisión de Residencia y Cambio Climático. It's basically a climate change resilience committee. We work within local municipality on this project of having Monteverde become certified carbon neutral. In order to achieve that, we have done greenhouse gas inventories. This is the latest one, it's literally hot off the press. It came out in November. These are real numbers. Monteverde, that little tiny community out in the middle of nowhere, Tilarán Mountain, emits 19,605 tons of CO2 or equivalent gases per year. 63% of that is coming out of our mufflers. How you and I decide to move plays a critical role in the amount of greenhouse gases that we emit. And if you were to do an inventory here in San Jose, I'm sure you would probably get similar results or anywhere in Costa Rica. If you were to do one in another country, in the US, it might be a little bit different. But here in Monteverde, 63% is coming from vehicle emissions. Practically 13% comes from energy. Most of that is not electricity. Electricity only 1.7, 1.8%. Most of it, 8.3%, is LP gas. How we decide to eat our lunch or eat our dinner plays a critical role. And we're working pretty much to promote induction ovens, different ways of cooking, because there are alternatives. The technology exists. We don't necessarily use them. Another source of emission that nobody talks about, again, a little more than 10%, is waste. Anything you flush down the toilet or send to the landfill ends up producing methane gas. And that is a lot more powerful than CO2 in terms of emission. And that is something that we all need to be aware of. Composting, separating our trash, recycling, and even they say, oh yeah, well, recycling, what's that going to do? There's actually a whole lot in terms of carbon emissions. Now, if you were to do this inventory here in San Jose, what you probably would not see is the agriculture sector. That decision made by the Quakers back in 1953 to start the Monteverde cheese factory still has an effect today. Almost 10% of our emissions come from methane from those cows. And if you talk to many environmentalists, they'll say, oh, it's the cows. The whole problem with climate change is those cows. The fossil fuel companies have done a really good job of convincing of that. We had cows 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. We didn't have the problem with climate change today. But anyway, that's a good narrative, right? But I won't lie. It does produce a significant amount of emissions. The good news is Monteverde has managed to decrease its emissions. It's very hard to see here, but from the previous inventory in 2019, it went from 19,851 tons to 19,605. It doesn't seem like very much, but remember there's economic growth in between those, so that is a significant reduction. We are not carbon neutral yet. I wish I could come today and say that we were. We have managed to remove or sequester 11,663 tons. That still leaves us with 7,942 tons of CO2 sequestered. So we're moving forward, but we're not there yet. So some of the things Proclima has been promoting very heavily: electric mobility. Monteverde had the very first electrical recharge route in Costa Rica. That has since spread. There's rutas eléctricas in many different communities now. Local businesses every day are more and more aware of the importance of offering places to charge electric vehicles. That is crucial in reducing emissions. Another area we have worked on very extensively is building infrastructure, sidewalks, so that people don't have to use electric vehicles. Changing infrastructure is crucial. Getting to these changes is going to involve all of us changing the way we move, the way we work, and we need to start to be prepared for that. Other areas that we work on: community gardens, local food production. Anything you can produce in your local communities is going to lower your emissions. We also have a barter store. We named it the Tilichera. Basically, think a thrift store, but no cash involved. So you can take things and exchange them. Oh, I don't want this blouse. Okay, I'll change it for a new one. On a point-based system, so that helps families, no money involved. And anything that doesn't sell will be upcycled and used to produce something different that they can then sell and finance the project. Now, the aspect that I have worked on the most in the last 6 years of my life is regenerative agriculture. Remember, almost 10% of Monteverde's emissions come from the methane from those cows. My family has been dairy farmers since they moved to Costa Rica in 1980. And 7 years ago, I took over the management of our farm. I started farming just as I've been raised to do, conventionally. Lots of chemical fertilizer and chemicals, ivermectin, anti-parasite medicine, anything you would associate to conventional or normal agriculture. The problem is, by then I've been working with climate change for 4 years, and I felt kind of hypocritical, saying, oh yeah, let's do climate change, and well, what are the emissions? Well, yeah, cows are one of them, right? So I said, no, I need to start either shut down the family farm, something that my ego really wouldn't let me do, or change it and try to figure out ways I could farm more sustainably. So I started looking at my sources of emissions, decided I was going to cut out all chemical fertilizers, because that is another important source of emissions. I did. I went cold turkey. I also cut out heavy antibiotics, ivermectins, and anti-parasite medicines, and basically started down the path of regenerative farming. That, coupled with important changes in my grazing rotation, meant that I was able to start to build back the mycorrhizal fungi in my soil. The harsh chemicals like fertilizer and killing the mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi is key because that is the fungus network that not only allows plants to communicate with each other, but also allows the root system to access nutrients they wouldn't otherwise. So if your root gets here, but there's nitrogen or phosphorus down here, the fungus will transmit those nutrients up to the plant roots. But in exchange, because nothing's ever free, right? They'll say, okay, I'm sending you nitrogen, but you're going to give me the carbon that you absorb through photosynthesis. And the mycorrhizal fungi is responsible for taking that carbon and storing it in the soil. So converting to regenerative agriculture is key. On our farm, because we made these changes, we changed our mission from producing milk to growing soil. And we grow soil by producing milk because we have changed our whole basis of agriculture. And that has allowed us to become certified the first carbon neutral dairy farm in Monteverde, sequestering 302 tons more CO2 than what our cows are spewing out into the atmosphere. To me, this is important because I'm nobody in the middle of nowhere. But the message to climate change, the actions we need to take with climate change are things we all have to do. So one of the things I want to ask you guys today are, what are the sources of your emissions? I want you guys to reflect on your lives, on your lifestyle, on where you live, on your communities. What does the waste system in your community look like? Do you have open air treatment lagoons for your water, for example? Do you have landfills that are spewing methane out into the atmosphere 24/7? Unfortunately, in Costa Rica, we do. That's something that needs to change. What are our food production systems? Unfortunately, here in Costa Rica, regenerative agriculture is not very common. There's only very few of us that are slowly starting down this path. A lot of the food we eat is conventional, produced with lots of chemicals, lots of fertilizers that end up killing the mycorrhizal fungi. That is critical. That needs to change. Also, where is our energy coming from? This last week or two in Costa Rica, we've talked a lot about energy with the threat of cuts because of El Nino. Costa Rica is world famous for the fact that most of our energy comes from renewables. It should be all. We should be promoting in our communities, on top of our homes. We need to have solar panels. We need to have renewable energy sources to start to offset this. Like I said, in Costa Rica, less than 2% of our energy comes from the burning of fossil fuels. It should be zero. We need to change that so that all of our energy is 100% renewable. In Monteverde, the changes that we have made are starting to have an impact. Excuse me. Like I said, we are not carbon neutral yet, but we are slowly getting there. We've been trying to measure some of the impacts. The biggest one has been so far of the building with the sidewalks. Thank you. But there are other projects that are starting to bear fruit. I didn't talk about it, but we also have a composting project that is also managed to sequester 20% of our emissions. Regenerative agriculture, part of it, electric vehicles, is also another very significant part. just because of the way Costa Rica is doing things in the world, it's very hard to see, but we are ranked number 7 in the Green Futures Index. These are the countries that are making the biggest progress and commitment for building a green future. We're not the best. We still have a lot of room for improvement. There are other countries that are much worse. If you're curious, some of you are from the U.S. The U.S. is ranked number 40. Some of the European countries, like the USSR and Middle Gulf countries, they're way down here. I'm not even going to talk about that. Basically, the whole world really needs to start to change the way we do things. The first one is Iceland, 100% geothermal. Iceland is 100% geothermal. That's number 1. Which is interesting because if you look back, Iceland 40 years ago, most of the electricity was thermal. That switch, the renewables, has all happened within our lifetimes. So it just proved that you can do things. I mean, Costa Rica, we're doing pretty good. We should be number 1. And we have the potential to be number 1, or at least try to be number 1. And the whole rest of the world should be doing that too. At this point in the game, everything you do, anything you do, any and everything you do, has the possibility to create change. But remember, we have very little time to create change. So we really need to actively start to think about our lives, our communities, what we're doing, how we can start to evoke that change. I've talked a lot. I'm going to finish up and take some questions. I still have a graph I want to show you. And actually, before I go to the sources, why don't I do that? I think it's a momentito. So your question about the emissions and where they're coming from. The richest 10% of the planet currently emits 49% of the CO2. So when your question about, well, what do we do about India right now? India is down here. The poorest 50% of the planet is responsible for less than 10% of the emissions. So your question about what do we do to make as India goes from here to here is very valid. And there's a lot we can do in terms of transitioning to clean energy, but we have to be aware that many of the emissions and all of the historical emissions are all centered in the north, unfortunately. I'll go back to and this is feel free at the end because the screen is a little bit blurry. If you want to take a screenshot of the computers, it perhaps might be more clear, or I can send that to Sarah so that she can circulate it. There's a whole list of possible sources of information if you like to read. If you don't like to read and want to watch a movie, there's a movie there, number 15, called Kiss the Ground. Talks about the importance of regenerative agriculture. If you watch it on Netflix, also access it from their webpage. There's a bunch of other books. Some of them you might have heard about, and some of the people you might have heard about, like Greta Thunberg. Her book is excellent, talks a lot about the science. David Wallace Wells does as well, so does Michael Mann. There's also a very important book up there, edited by Paul Hopkins, number 5, which talks about solutions. That book lists 100 areas of action, things that we can do. I've talked about some of them today. Renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, upcycling, other things I didn't talk about. Education for women, birth control, saving the peatlands, all these things, retrofitting buildings. We never think about some of these things. If we are to achieve net zero, and the way to do that is depicted in book number 8, we have to take action on a whole bunch of fronts. We can't just do one thing. You can't just say, oh, well, I drive an electric car, and that is multiple problem. No, we have to take action on many different levels. One book, actually 2 books I want to point out. One is this beautiful reading, The Tree Line by Ben Rollins, talks about the importance of the boreal forest. That's not our ecosystem, but I mention it because when we think about climate change, we always think about the tropics. But the boreal forest plays a very important role, not only in our global climate regulations, but also in carbon sequestration. And we're cutting it down to make flood. And we're burning it. Okay, so we need to be aware of some of these things are happening. I also want to point out Christiana Figueres' book, number 6. You guys have all probably heard about Christiana Figueres. She was instrumental in getting the Paris Agreement signed. She went to Monteverde in the 1980s and saw the golden boat. She went back to Monteverde in the 1990s because she wanted to show the golden boat to her children. And when she got there and went to the reserve, she discovered it had been gone extinct. That led her to become a climate change activist. And eventually it led her to become crucial in getting the Paris Agreement signed. So if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. If nothing else, to hear about her story and how it links to Monteverde and the golden toad. At this point, there is hope. There is things that we can all do, but we have to take action. So my goal in coming here today is to have you guys think about that. Think about what you guys can do, what we all can do, because we all have to start taking action really fast. I'll finish up. I don't know if there's any questions there and then there. I can get you some. I don't have them on this list because I was told this is all English speaking, but I can get you some.
Yes, I have stories and other people for that.
Some of these books, actually, the Greta Thunberg book has been translated into Spanish already. You can buy it online. It's excellent. I actually have read the Spanish version and then listed it in English. But so that's one I can immediately tell you. But there's others too.
Yeah.
Huh?
Cristiana.
The Cristiana is also in Spanish. Okay. So there's 2 right there. I think you had a question.
No, it's more like a comment. Because we've been to this thing this week. Along the way, you mentioned the Paris Agreement. We've all heard or remember that NIMBY, not in my yard, moved in the 80s. We've had about this stone yard records of in Germany that became very much involved in the climate change and blah, blah, blah. And whether we want it or not, everything involves politics. It is politics.
Yes.
Whether we want it or not. I am totally devastated and I don't get it anymore when I read La Nación, for example, or any other source of information that tells me about the beautiful hotel 5, 6, 7 stars in Peninsula de Osa. They are killing the environment. They're killing the birds. They're killing everything. For someone who comes and spends millions, $2,000 a night in that hotel. So, who is responsible for that? Our governments. And I don't say one in particular, but everybody's involved. So, everything involved. Politics. I'm sorry, I have to say it.
Well, that's very true. And I think that we have to realize that you and I can do everything we want to personally. We can go as extreme as stop flying on airplanes. That's what Greta Thunberg did. She said, I'm never going to fly an airplane again. It's high emissions. You could do that. Even if we all did that, that would just still be a drop in the ocean. Everything we do will help, and we all have to take action. And I believe our actions speak louder than words. For example, I switched to electric mobility 2 years ago. First of all, I love it. It's a lot cheaper than buying fossil fuel. But every time I go by the gas station and say, nice knowing you, I know I'm not emitting. This year we switched my husband's car to electric. I'm never going back to combustion engine. So that makes a statement that says I'm green, I'm going green, and I'm doing this. We have to lead with actions. But we also have to, at some level, get involved, either voting, or getting involved in your municipalities, or getting involved in decision making. And this isn't about party lines. It's about the future of our planet and doing what's best for our community. I think we all want clean air. We all want clean water. We all want biodiversity. That has nothing to do with politics. That has something to do with making our communities cleaner and safer. And that's really what this is about.
Can you do any, give us a quick on the replacement of individual cars with
Replacement of what type of cars? Individual cars with high-speed rail. I think in order to achieve carbon neutrality, even carbon negativity, mass transport, rail, high-speed or otherwise, plays a role, just like buses do. Any type of collective ride sharing even, all plays a critical role. I mean, there are, what, 8 billion of us on the planet now? If each and every one of, billion, I said billion. If each, yeah, 8 billion. If each and every household, even if we put that into household, 4 billion of us each had a car or two, there wouldn't be enough space. I mean, mass transit plays a role. Whether it's high speed or not, I think it has to be energy efficient. It has to be run on renewables. In Costa Rica, we could go a long way to improving the quality of our mass transit, of making it more efficient, of making it safer. It would be great if we had high-speed rail in Costa Rica. I think we're a long ways from that. I think other countries are closer. But yeah, all of that plays a role. That all has to happen. We have to see a full mega transformation of our societies, of how we live, of where we live, of how we move around. It's not just one thing.
just what every person I hadn't thought about it. Maybe you know about the reason why they can divide. It is 3 months worth of people development and 2 days. You can think about this process.
There's been a lot of debate when these types of extreme weather events come up to say, was this exact event caused by climate change? And what the scientists have said is you can't attribute one phenomenon to climate change. What they're very certain of is the severity increases, the intensity increases with climate change. So if climate change weren't a factor, it might have been flooded, rain in Dubai anyway. It probably wouldn't have been 3 months of rain in a short amount of time. This is the type of extreme weather we're experiencing in Monteverde and all over Costa Rica. And it's in Dubai. Last year, Scotland, in 3 hours, got 2 months of rain. New Zealand had extreme weather events like this. California, Black Winter got a lot of them. These are global phenomena. And they're just being made worse. And so you that once in a 100-year flood that you hear about, well, now it becomes once in a 10-year flood. Okay, so the chances of severity of impact magnify with climate change. One more on there.
I just have a simple question. The brand, cheese brand Monteverde, is that actually from Monteverde? You said that the cooperative or whatever was sold?
Okay, yes, that's important. The cheese factory in Monteverde was sold 10 years ago to a transnational, but all the Monteverde cheese is still made in Monteverde. Sigma Alimentos currently owns the Monteverde cheese brand, but all Monteverde cheese is still only made in Monteverde. I think the question here.
First of all, I just want to thank it seems like you're good at what you do. And right now, I'm working as a volunteer in the subway, and I was just wondering how many of these types of lectures you give. And I think one step in the right direction is educating our youth because they are our future. And I think that this type of lecture for them would have a huge impact on
Yes. I do several lectures like this a month to different audiences. Some of them are youth, some of them are not youth. I think we all need to play a role in taking action, but also talking about what we're doing. Because you're right, you need to spark that change. And that's one of the reasons I agree to give these talks is because we need to think about this, we need to reflect about it, and hopefully I will spark change in one of you, and you guys will go and do something, and that will spark change in someone else, and we can start to create a snowball effect. So I'll finish up there. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. I appreciate it.
Sarah, have you ever been filmed? She filmed me.
She filmed me today. We got the recording. Huh?
Could I use the lecture?
I just got that.
We have English, and you have a question for Sarah.
You can come visit our dairy farm. We're normally not open to tourism, but if you talk with me, I can arrange something private.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Amazing. I know we got a late start, so we went a little over, and we're still a little over. We have a few announcements to make, so I'm going to try and do that really quickly. We have door prizes. When you want to come up and do that, and while you come up, I will say thank you to the leadership team for being amazing. It's not just me, I get to stand up here, but the leadership team is made up by many people. We have Helen, we have Phyllis, who are our people connectors and emeritus positions on our leadership team. We have Mooney, who is our vice president. We have Anna, who does communications and does it amazingly. We have Gabriela, who has put together each one of these events and done it so beautifully. Romy has been in charge of membership for many years, and she's looking to transition out of that if you'd like to help. Gloriana has taken on our social media, which is a wonderful relief for both Anna and myself. We have Anya, who's our secretary and an expert in Microsoft, so she's a wonderful addition as well. Did I get everybody? We have some other auxiliary members who help a lot. Gabriela Halpin, who used to do our door prizes, and Jackie, who does our door prizes currently. So thank you to everybody on our leadership team. We have Leonore and Milagro, who have been helping as well. When you got some numbers there, everybody have their little handmade tickets. 16.
Oh, she just left. I have her number. No, I have her number, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, let's qualify. She's here at every And then we also have a notebook and pen set. Ready, set.
Here, not yours. I'll do it all the time.
Right.
Okay, this is number 2.
Number 2. All right. Notebook and pen.
No.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have upcoming events. We have in June. Mooney and I were just trying to remember. Okay. We will email you with exactly what we're doing unless Phyllis remembers exactly what we're doing.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we have Ali, who has done several sections of the Camino de Costa Rica, as well as Ana Maria Matamoros, artist, as part of our membership, who has completed the whole Camino de Costa Rica. This is a trail that crosses Costa Rica. It's really been a boon and helped local rural tourism projects, as well as just being an amazing project where they created, and it did start out of networking, started out of women's networking in particular. So we're really excited to hear how it started and how it's continuing on to be a phenomenal project. And Gloria Pino is one of the people who helped found it. So she'll be speaking to us in June. It is the 3rd Saturday of June, if I recall correctly. So we'll send you more details on that, and we'll look forward to seeing you then, and then our other events throughout the year. Okay, perfect. We also, Holly, would you mind talking just for a moment about our very important Rahab Foundation campaign right now? We do have social responsibility throughout the year, and Ali is in charge of that. So.
Hi, everyone. I would like to give an update on our fundraising for Rahab. We are $25 short of our $500 goal. So I really hope that we can make it today. Some is coming. I will be collecting and then I will donate on your behalf.
Yeah.
I can also drop into the WhatsApp, the ways to donate digitally as well, if you prefer to send from Simpay or other options. But we're so close.
Here we have too many items.
Yes. You'll find me in the WhatsApp group. I'm under Alicia. Send me a screenshot. I'll make sure you're on our list. So I'm keeping a running total of where we're at. Then I have it. Yeah, so we're so close. I really hope today is the day. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so we just made our goal. Congratulations, everybody. Awesome. Thank you all. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your patience with our little tech difficulties. And thank you, Diego, for making it all happen. Thank you again, Sarah. You're welcome.
I just want to